Welcome to the Catbird Quilts. I'm Kathy Martin. In today's video, we're doing something a little different. I'm going to attempt to make an entire quilt, including quilting and binding, in a weekend. And I don't have a lot to say. I have a lot to do. So let's get started. So quilting is slow. It's a slow process. There are a lot of steps. And I say that a lot, even to myself, just to remind myself, I don't have to rush. Quilting is slow. It takes time, so on and so forth. But there are times that we might have a desire to quilt quickly or make a quilt in a much shorter period of time. And that might be you have small children and can't leave everything out all the time. Or maybe you don't have a dedicated sewing space and you have to clean off the dining room table to do your sewing and can't leave your dining room table full of sewing machine and fabrics for 4 months. Or maybe you've got a quilt retreat coming up and you want to do all or most of a project in just a few days. Or you might be like me and work full time, and when you get a long weekend, like a holiday weekend, you really want to dedicate the whole thing to quilting, and the more of a project you can get done, the better. Or you may just want to make a quick gift for someone. So there are reasons maybe to try to do a quilt in a weekend. And so that's what I'm attempting to do starting today. So it's 7:30 in the morning on Saturday morning. I'm finishing up my coffee and we're getting ready to I'm getting ready to make a quilt in a weekend. Paula's getting ready to document the process. And we're going to bring you along and let you see. There are a couple of rules I set out for myself, of course, because anytime I do a challenge, I have to give myself rules. I did not do any of the cutting. The only thing I did was fabric prep. So I starched my fabric, but that's it. I wanted to treat this like I really was starting from scratch. So my binding isn't made, my backing isn't made. I'll be doing everything starting now. So let's do it. So I'm starting with cutting because it's a very good place to start. I'll be making the Comfort Quilt designed by Sharon Holland. It's in the book Utility Quilts for Everyday Living. I've already done a video on that. You can watch that. But I'm going to be making another one this one is going to be a large throw size. With cutting, what I have done to put in my favor, I put in a new rotary blade. I've cleared around my cutting table so I can work all 3 sides. I made myself a cutting guide so I know how many blocks I need to get from each shirt, which, by the way, I'm using shirts. These are easy, big-ish blocks, so I'm not cutting a lot of intricate pieces or different shapes. So I really just have squares to cut. In the downside category, I am working with shirts, which takes a little bit longer than yardage, is a little bit more difficult than yardage to cut. I'm also working with all linen today, including backing and binding, and it's just notoriously crawly. But I have put that in my favor by starching my fabrics in advance. So all my fabrics are ready to go. I just need to cut them. And I will also be cutting my binding and my backing. So that's going to add a little bit of time. But I thought if I batched it all and cut everything, including binding, while I'm doing my piecing, then that task will be done. And when I sit down to sew, I can just sew and sew and sew. So, ready, set, go. So my cutting is done. It took almost exactly 3 hours. I thought it might take 2.5, but no. I'm a terrible judge of time. That probably doesn't surprise any of you. So I've had a tea break. Now it's time for potty break, lunch break, and then I'll start sewing. I'm excited about that part. I've had lunch now, and I want nothing more than a nap. But in order to have a nap, I need a nap quilt. So I've got to get back at it because I'm making a nap quilt. So now is sewing, and I have done a lot of pre-work so that my sewing will hopefully go quickly and well. I have oiled my machine. I have multiple bobbins already wound and ready to go. I have tons of thread. I have replaced my needle, so I have a nice sharp needle. I found a rolling cart that was, when I was cleaning up my space to be able to do the nap quilt, I had to put a lot of stuff in the other room and found this this little empty cart just waiting to be used. So I put that beside me to hold my pieces so that it's not kind of all up on top of me while I'm sewing it. So I'm going to sew my backing, which I'm piecing together, and then all my quilt pieces, and then the binding together. So I have no idea how long this is going to take. This is the part that I grossly misjudge on the reg. So I've got my little snowball corner squares right here ready to go, and I'm just going to put them together and go. I have also put my little washi seam allowance tape so that I'm not having to mark, and I'm actually not pinning my snowball corners in order to sew them. So hopefully I'll be able to maintain a level of accuracy that I want to. The things that may pose problems are the linen backing. I noticed when I cut it, I did not starch the backing, and so it's real slidey. So I did pin it. And I also anticipate that the binding may take longer than I think, because I usually just make it as a whole separate, like on a whole other day, maybe weeks after the quilt top is made. So I might be trucking along and get to the binding and go, oh. So we'll see. But that's where we are. I actually even put together some pieces for a future project that I can use as leaders and enders, really enders. I probably won't remember to do it. And I'm about to change my music and do something with some juice. So probably going to be my Earth, Wind, and Fire mix. And so if we do some video in the meantime and I'm like grooving, that's the reason why. So here we go. And now it's on to pressing. We have pressing matters. I ascribe to the Karen Brown Just Get It Done Quilt school of you press your seam the way it's been sewn first before you fold it back and press it into the direction it's supposed to go. I could forego that today because I'm trying to save time, but I really do think her logic is sound, that it sets the threads into the seam. And so what I'm going to do is trim my threads and press all my seams the current direction, and then trim with scissors and then flip them back and press again. So I'm going to be pressing for a while, and I've opted to use my scissors today because my snowball corners are kind of small, and I think it might help me save some time rather than making a whole stack and then going over to the cutting table and having to line them up again. I really don't think it's mission critical to do that with my rotary cutter. So we'll see if that helps and how long it takes. I, in my head, budgeted like an hour for this, but it might take more. I do have to line up and pin the big long seam of the backing, and then my backing will be done. So I'm gonna hopefully work both my tailor's clappers to death, and my poor ironing board is starting to show signs of wear, and it will no doubt look worse after I get done. But we'll see how long it takes me to do this step. So pressing is done, and I just realized I didn't check the time. I think I had budgeted like 30 minutes to an hour, and I'm pretty sure we're like at hour and a half, maybe 2 at this point. So for pressing and trimming, I did notice when I went to pin my linen backing piece to the bigger part of the linen backing that I did not cut it very close to the grain. I don't think it has to be right on, but usually I try to get it pretty close. Pretty sure it's not close. So we'll see how that's going to play out. I have a backup plan for the backing. So if it's disastrous, I have a queen size flat 100% cotton sheet from the thrift store that I can use. So never fear, the backing will be okay either way, but I may have jacked up my linen. So now I'm gonna stop and take a break and have a snack and caffeinate myself. And then we're on to doing the layout. And we'll see if I can keep that short and sweet. So here we go. Now we're at layout, and this is kind of the fun part, but it can also be like the rabbit hole that you get down and get lost in, at least for me. And so I have put a few things in my favor. I have a timer that I'm going to set. I don't actually know how long it's going to take me to put the blocks on the wall, but I'm going to set a 30-minute timer to move things around so that I don't move around endlessly all the blocks, and then it makes a difference. So I've had a healthy snack, and and I am really wishing for that nap now, but I'm ready to go. So I'm going to put my blocks up. I have co-opted our dining room wall and put up a white flannel sheet, because if you decide to do a throw size quilt, you need enough space to spread out the blocks for a throw size quilt. So all these quilted a day and quilted a weekend videos I've seen, they're usually crib size. And so like the design wall that's behind me in my sewing area would be perfect, except it's double that size. So we've taken over the dining room totally now. And so I put the blocks up, put some jamming music in, see if I can get it together. And I've got my Post-its ready to label each, I guess it's column. And then it'll be back to sewing again. So here we go. So the layout is done. It's been 45 minutes, which is actually better than I thought, considering I didn't really set the timer the way I was supposed to. I had made 2 blocks extra, and it's a good thing because the kind of acid green one was not easy to integrate. So I'm going to get my Sharpie and Post-its and label my columns, and then drink some water, take a potty break, and then it's going to be time to sew again. And now we sew again. So now's the time that I'm going to stitch those two linen pieces together to make the back. So I've got a lighter linen piece and a slightly darker linen piece for the backing. Actually, I may not know if it works out until I go to do the quilt sandwich. But anyway, and then I'm going to sew my rows together. They're actually columns. I typically am a person who does, so like if they're numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, I go 1 to 2, 3 to 4, 5 to 6, 7 to 8, and then I sew those pairs together. But today, in the interest of trying something new, and also I think it will be quicker, I'm going to sew every single 1 to 2 together, and then all of column 3 to the 1, 2, and then all of column starting to get tired, 4 to what is now 1, 2, 3 together. What it will end up being is webbing, for those of you that have done that. I have never done this before, so this could be disastrous. But I thought it might be the easiest way to keep it all together. So we're going to give it a shot. I am loving the color choices that I made. The navy looks a little blacker than I was expecting, or just kind of in that charcoal gray family. And the lightest green looks more yellow in context with all the rest. So I'm kind of getting my head around that. I'm kind of thinking if I had it to do all over again, I would have dropped out that lime green that's very, very light. Celadon, I don't know what color that is. Citron. But anyway, so those are some thoughts. I like the marigold corners. I'm glad it's going to be less of them once it's sewn together because it's very golden. So I usually get to this place at this point where I'm like, I don't know. And sewing the columns together always takes longer than I think. I always think it's going to take like an hour, and it takes double that. So I'm going to half again, and I think it's going to take me like 3 hours to do this. Maybe I'll be surprised. And then we'll break for dinner, and then we'll see. So we're about 7.5 hours in to this day. I have enjoyed myself. I've not been rushing, and I worried about that. I was afraid I was going to be like really trying to get it done for the sake of the video. But instead, it's actually been a really decently paced day. I haven't been stressed. I'm starting to get tired. But other than that, so sewing it is, and ready, set, go. So all my rows are done. I'm about an hour and 15 minutes into what I think is a 3-hour process. So what I have to do now is lay this out a row at a time on my sewing table and press the whole row, like seams all one direction on one row, and then all the other direction for the next row, so that my seams will nest. So I'll do that, get out my ironing board, or pull my ironing board over and press my seams. I can't think of the word. Trim my threads, pin. This will probably be the only step that I pin because I like for my rows to line up. Then sew all the rows to each other, and then I'll have a quilt top. And so we'll see how long that takes. So I'm done pressing my rows in opposite directions so that I can nest them. And it took quite a bit of time. I'm 2 hours and some change into my 3-hour estimated budget. And I'm tired. It's starting to really catch up with me. So I'm going to stop and have dinner, clear my head, probably do some stretches, drink some water, all of the things. And when I come back, I'm going to pin and sew my rows together. So hopefully by the time I go to bed tonight, I'll have a whole quilt top done. I would hope so at this point. I really, in my wildest dreams, I would have been like, maybe we can get the quilt sandwich done tonight, but that is foolishness. So finishing the quilt top is the objective for tonight and getting everything ready for tomorrow for the quilt sandwich. And now I'm going to eat because I'm starving. So it's been an hour and 15 minutes since the pinning and sewing of the rows, and I now have a complete quilt top. It's been a very full day's work. I'm very tired. I am not the spring chicken that I used to be. I'm tired of sewing for the day. I kind of want to hold this up, but there's really nowhere for me to put it. So I'm just going to be like, hey, it's a quilt top. So we're going to call it a night, at least in here. I'm actually going to take the ironing board and iron into our living room and watch a movie and press my now completed quilt top and the backing in prep for tomorrow, so that what I'll be able to do first thing in the morning is do the quilt sandwich. So that's exciting. I started to say thank you for being with me today, but this will all be one video. But thank you for being with me today for at least this part of the video, and we will call it a day, and I'll see you in the morning for the quilt sandwich. It's now day 2 of the Quilts in a Weekend, and I'm about an hour later than yesterday. I don't know if I slept well, but I slept hard. So we're just about to jump in, and by we, I mean me. Gonna start with the quilt sandwich. I did get the quilt top pressed last night before I went to bed, so that's ready to roll. I'll have to trim my batting and get the quilt sandwich made. And I'm going to be pin basting today because it is a fairly decently sized throw. So it's probably going to end up 64 by 72. So I'm going to be pin basting this morning, and I expect it'll take a couple of hours. The crib size that I did in the exact same pattern took about an hour, and this is about double the size, probably realistically every bit of 2 hours. I'm using bamboo batting, which I've never used before. And let me tell you already, it is the softest thing. But it's thin, which should work nicely with my linen backing and all linen top. So we'll see. I'm gonna be in it for a little while, so I'm gonna turn on probably a Disney movie that I can sing along and pin baste my little heart out, and then I'll jump into quilting. The quilt sandwich. I almost did it again. What is that? The quilt sandwich is finished, and my poor knees need a break. So we're going to take a break. I'm going to have some lunch and stretch, and then be ready to quilt. While I was putting my pins in my quilt, I worked out which direction I want to start quilting from. When I laid out the quilt top, it was a little short on one side. So I'm going to start with that side so that as I quilt, if it crawls, it'll crawl in the direction of the overhang. So I marked my quilt, I pinned the edges, I pinned the batting and the backing together on the corners so it doesn't get folded under while I'm quilting. So I should be ready to go once I eat and give my little body a break. So I made it through the dreaded quilt sandwich, least favorite part of the process. And now I'm in my second to least favorite part of the process, which is the quilting. So I'll be white knuckling it for the next couple of hours, trying to keep my shoulders off of my earlobes while I do my quilting. I used the bamboo batting, which started as a recommendation from someone on YouTube in the comments because it's so breathable and soft, which is obviously such a desirable thing. But also it is rated at 8 inches span for quilting. So I do not have to do a lot of quilting. I'm actually just going to stitch in the ditch and call it a day. And so it will be hopefully a very soft and drapey sort of nap quilt. And I am back to needing the nap. I did want to say before I move on to actually doing the quilting, I'm procrastinating right now. The actual quilt sandwich, I rolled it up and picked it up to bring it in here, and it is the softest and heaviest thing. Now, granted, it's covered in safety pins, but I just instantly was like, I mean, I could just go lay down with it like this. Nobody would know. So anyway, ready, set, go. Here goes the quilting. The quilting is done. I had thought that I might do more than just stitch in the ditch. No, there is no more quilting. So now I'm going to go sit on my couch and take out all of these safety pins. There was a moment where I thought about doing it as I was quilting, but I knew that it would hold up the quilting time. And I was like, I can't. So I'm going to go sit on the couch and take off all of the safety pins. And then I'm going to sit down on the floor and do yoga with Adrienne, neck, shoulder, and upper back body in 10 minutes and 37 seconds. And then I'm going to come back and trim off the overhang of the batting and the backing. I'm not going to square it up. We'll talk about that in a minute. Then once I get that done, it'll be time for binding. And so when I get ready to bind, I'm going to have to wind another bobbin. I didn't think I would need 3 bobbins. Apparently I do. So I'm going to wind one more bobbin, change my thread out, and then I'll be in binding. And then I'll be in the home stretch. Cannot wait. The unpinning process took like 35 minutes or 40 minutes. I would have thought it would have taken 10. So there's that. I did do my yoga with Adrienne. My neck and shoulders feel much better, which is great because once I get the quilt trimmed, then I'm going to be doing the binding and then back to sewing. For the trimming, normally I would square up my quilt. I like it to be nice and straight, especially if I'm giving it as a gift. This nap quilt is for me, and I don't care if it's really square and straight. So I'm going to square up the corners with the method that most people use to square their quilt, which is to take a big square. How many times can I say square? A big square ruler to get the corners right. So that way when I do my binding, it'll be nice. But then after that, I'm really just going to connect the 2 squared off corners with as straight a line as possible and call it good. I'm hoping that this is going to get lots of use and feel really great. So I'm not really worried about it being nice, and I've also said nice like 6 times. So anyway, it won't be nice or straight or square, but it will be trimmed. And I have to do that before I can move on to the binding. So let's do it. I have no idea how long that took. I do know that I just can't help myself. I really want things to be straight and square and nice. but it's done now. I'm moving on to the binding, and I did a little binding practice earlier this week before, the craziness started. And I decided that I was going to use Dove Gray on the top and linen colored thread on the back, which is also what I did for the quilting. So that way, hopefully, any oopsies won't be as obvious. So we'll see. But it's time now. Last step. Well, the last step should be labeling. That's not happening today. Binding's going to be the last step. And I have no idea how long that will take. So let's just do it and we'll find out. My quilt is done and it's still daylight outside. Not for long, but so I've made my whole entire quilt, including binding, and I tied off and buried my threads, and it is done. And I am tired. Now I need a nap. I have really enjoyed this process, but I will tell you, after having done this, I doubt I will do it again. I definitely will not video it. Paul and I will not spend our time videoing a whole quilt again. I have such a sense of accomplishment, and it's just been really cool to see every step of the quilting process back to back to back. It's like I forget. I'll go, oh, next week. Oh, wait, no, we have to. So there's just more to it. And, I say quilting is slow. And the takeaway from this is quilting is slow. And no amount of rushing makes it not slow. Like if you want to do a quilt top in a day, totally can do. If you want to do a crib size in a day or maybe a weekend, totally can do. If you have a long arm, I envy you, and probably would make this process much, much faster. But for those of us that are quilting on a domestic machine, doing everything ourselves, it's slow and it's enjoyable. And I took some shortcuts, not a lot. I intentionally did not take some, and I don't think I would do it differently if I had to do it again. But for those of you that are wondering, can it be done? Yes, it can be done. And my final quilt is 64 inches by 72 inches. So long enough for me to tuck it under my chin, the length of my body and over my feet, and wide enough, hopefully, that if I turn over to get even more snugly, it will still be there behind me, covering me up. So the nap quilt is complete. It has been a great experiment. I feel the satisfaction of having a whole quilt without having it tied up my whole house for months. But like I said, I think I'll just go back to my little bits and pieces at a time, slow quilting. And I hope you've enjoyed being with me along this weekend journey of making a whole quilt. I'm Kathy Martin. This is the Catbird Quilts. Thank you so much for watching.